All right, let's dive into one of the most influential stories ever told. Now, it's a story you probably think you know, but when you really look at it, it's not just a nice holiday tale. It's actually this incredible divine rescue mission, and it kicks off in the most unexpected way you can imagine.
So everything really hangs on this one big question. How does the person who would go on to shape history more than anyone else show up in a place nobody's ever heard of? You see, this whole story is about contrast. Heavenly power versus earthly helplessness. A royal title for a baby born in a rugged stable. This question really sets the whole stage.
But, to really get the arrival, you've got to understand the waiting. This wasn't just some random event that popped up out of nowhere. No. This was the grand finale to literally thousands of years of hope and anticipation.
I mean, just look at this timeline. The scale of time here is just staggering. It starts with the very first promises in Scripture. Then you have the prophets, guys like Isaiah and Micah, talking about a coming king, while massive empires are rising and falling all around them. By the time Rome is in charge, the Jewish people are just desperate, groaning for their promised Messiah. So the stage is perfectly set, right? But God, he was about to do something nobody saw coming. And so, instead of starting in some grand palace, the story zooms into this tiny, insignificant town in Galilee. And the main characters aren't kings or queens. No, they're just two very ordinary people who are about to get a call that seems absolutely impossible. So let's meet our main characters, Mary and Joseph. He is a carpenter, and she is a young girl, probably just a teenager. Now, yeah, they're technically descendants of the great King David, but that royal family hadn't meant anything for centuries. They were, for all intents and purposes, nobodies. From a town that was a running joke, people would literally say, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Okay, and this next part is super important. They were betrothed. Now, this wasn't like our modern engagement. In their culture, a betrothal was a rock-solid legal contract. The only way out was divorce. And if Mary turned up pregnant and Joseph wasn't the father, she could be publicly shamed, even stoned to death. I mean, we're talking about a life and death situation here. The stakes could not have been higher. So into this high-stakes situation, an angel, Gabriel, shows up to this teenage girl, and he delivers a message that is going to pivot the entire course of human history. He tells her, "Don't be afraid, you're going to have a son, Jesus." And he's not just any son, he's the Son of God, the Messiah whose kingdom will last forever. He explains it's going to be a creative miracle of God's Spirit. Can you even imagine hearing those words? And Mary's response, it's just, wow. It's so simple, but it is packed with this incredible, courageous faith. Facing down the very real threat of public disgrace and death, she just says yes. Her simple obedience is the hinge on which this whole divine plan swings into motion. Now, let's not forget about Joseph. He finds out his fiancée is pregnant, and he knows he's not the father. He had every legal and social right to make a huge, shameful scene, but the story calls him a just man, and he proves it. Instead of having her punished, he decides he's going to end the betrothal quietly, just to protect her. That's just an incredible act of kindness and compassion. And it's right after he makes this decision that an angel shows up in a dream and tells him, "Don't worry, Mary's story is true." Okay, so all of this leads us right to the main event, the journey and the birth. And this is where that theme of humility just becomes so real it's almost hard to believe. So Caesar Augustus calls for a census, which basically means everybody has to uproot and travel to their ancestral hometown to be registered. For Joseph, that's Bethlehem, a grueling 90-mile trek with Mary, who is now very, very pregnant. We're talking several days on a donkey or on foot over rough terrain. And you can just picture it, right? They finally get there, totally exhausted, and nothing. The whole town is packed. There is no room for them anywhere. Just let that sink in for a second. The one that the story presents as the architect of the cosmos, the voice who spoke galaxies into being, ends up being born in a stable, a place for animals, surrounded by the smell of hay and dirt. And his first crib is a feeding trough, a manger. This one image says it all. The king of all creation enters his own world, not in a palace, but in the lowest, most overlooked, most humble place you could possibly think of. So the birth itself was incredibly humble. And the first people to show up? Well, they were just as unexpected. This part of the story introduces two totally different groups who come looking for this baby, and through them we see both a heavenly welcome and a deadly threat. What's amazing here is who God tells first.
He completely skips over the religious elite, the priests and the scholars in Jerusalem. Instead, the angelic birth announcement goes to a bunch of shepherds, guys who are considered social outcasts, so low on the ladder their testimony wasn't even allowed in court. And then it goes to the Magi, wealthy foreign scholars from the East. He tells the very bottom of the social ladder and respected outsiders, showing that this news is for absolutely everyone.
But of course, news like this travels, and that eventually gets to the one person you don't want to hear it, King Herod. Now, this guy was famously paranoid and violent. To protect his throne, he had already murdered his own wife and 3 of his sons. So when these magi show up asking about a newborn king of the Jews, he's not thinking, "Ah, a baby." He's thinking, "That's a threat to my throne."
And Herod, wow, he was a sly one. He calls in his religious experts, and they confirm the prophecy points to Bethlehem. Then he secretly grills the Magi about when the star appeared, so he can figure out how old the child is. He puts on this whole act, telling them, "Go find him, and when you do, come back and tell me so I can go and worship him too." All while secretly planning to send soldiers to kill him. But his whole sneaky plan just falls apart. The Magi get a warning in a dream and go home a different way, completely bypassing Herod. And then Joseph gets his own warning in a dream. Get up, take the child, and flee to Egypt. Think about that. The most powerful guy around, with all his soldiers and spies, gets outsmarted by a couple of dreams given to a few faithful people. Okay, so that's a great story from a long time ago. But what does a miraculous birth, a humble beginning, and a paranoid king actually have to do with us right now? Well, this is where it gets really personal. You know, this story just turns our modern values completely upside down. We live in a world that is obsessed with status, with celebrity, with power and influence. And this story holds up a God who chooses obscurity, humility, and even helplessness. Where we chase after wealth and comfort and recognition, this story celebrates poverty, simplicity, and quiet obedience. It's basically the exact opposite of everything we're told matters. And maybe this is the most important takeaway of all. For this world-changing rescue mission, God didn't pick an emperor or a high priest or a celebrity. He picked a carpenter. He picked a teenage girl. He picked a bunch of shepherds. He chose ordinary people living ordinary lives who were simply willing to say yes when he called. And that really leaves us with one last thought. If this whole story proves anything, it's that God specializes in using the overlooked, the unlikely, the people who feel completely ordinary to do the most extraordinary things. So the question it leaves for us is pretty personal. What's holding you back? Because this story suggests that whatever you think disqualifies you, that might be the very thing God is looking for.